The sky froze. It didn't fall. It didn't crack. It simply stopped moving, and the world below held its breath. The sun still rose, but only barely, pale and thin, like it was frightened of its own reflection. Its warmth was a memory, faint as smoke on snow. The wind changed first. It no longer swept across the land. It sliced through it, a knife made of silence. Trees didn't sway. They fractured. Branches snapped like bones. Shadows stretched longer. Nights came faster. This was not a season. This was something else. A turning, a reckoning. The cold was not just cold. It was ancient. It was absolute. It moved slowly, but without mercy, creeping across plains, swallowing rivers, burying mountains. The animals felt it. So did the soil, so did the stars, and somewhere out there, small, upright, soft-skinned and shivering, you stood. Fire cupped in your hands, breath rising in clouds, watching the light die, waiting for the world to decide if you belonged in it. And it didn't, not really, not yet. The cold didn't come like a scream. It came like a breath that never ended. At first, the world simply stopped blooming. Grass grew slower. Berries didn't ripen. The rivers stayed frozen too long. The animals you tracked were thinner, quieter, harder to find. Then the sun began to fade, still present in the sky, but smaller, farther, as if the gods had turned their faces away. The elders didn't speak of it, not at first. They had seen hard winters before. Years where people ate bark and boiled leather. Years where one burial followed the next. But even they knew this was different. They watched the sky at night and found the stars in the wrong places. They touched the snow and said it fell too early, too heavy, too much. The world was narrowing. You could feel it under your feet. The soil froze deeper each month until the land no longer gave. Digging became impossible. You learned to crack open frozen roots with a stone, to suck at the dry insides for the taste of something once alive. The rivers, once swollen with salmon, now froze solid, white serpents stretching across the land, mocking you with silence. The animals left, first the birds, then the boar, then the reindeer. You followed them. You left behind the old camp, the stone hearth, the half-built shelter where your sister gave birth. You buried your dead in snow mounds because the ground was too hard to accept them. You marked their graves with bones and antlers so they wouldn't be lost when the wind buried everything else. You walked for days across white that never changed. No trees, no hills, just sky and ice and wind. The children stopped asking where you were going. The old ones stopped answering. Your breath turned to frost in your beard. You began to sleep with your face tucked against another's back, just to keep your teeth from freezing in your skull. And still, it got colder. The sun became a rumour, a pale disk that climbed halfway up the sky and gave no heat. Fires took longer to light, and the wood burned too quickly. You tore apart old sleds for kindling. You burned dried dung. You burned fur. Anything to keep the cave warm enough to not die before morning. Even your thoughts began to change. You stopped thinking about seasons. There were no seasons now, only survival. You no longer measured time in days, but in meals, in steps, in moments when the wind dropped low enough to let you hear your own heartbeat. The land itself turned against you. Glaciers advanced like gods with no faces, slow, patient, unstoppable. You could hear them groaning in the night, moving in the distance, like mountains made of death. Valleys disappeared, hills flattened, the ice swallowed everything. Rivers, forests, memories. You saw it with your own eyes. One day the mammoth trail you had followed your whole life was simply gone, covered, erased, as if it had never existed. And in its place, only silence. Tribes vanished, not all at once, but steadily. A neighbouring group you'd traded with for years, gone. Their fire pit still warm, their cave walls still marked with ochre. No signs of struggle, just absence. Some must have starved, some wandered too far, some perhaps walked willingly into the white, choosing stillness over another hour of wind. You learned to listen for the creak of death, in the brittle snap of a snow-laden branch, in the wheeze of an elder's lungs, in the moment when the meat ran out and no one offered a plan. You stopped saying names out loud when someone didn't return from the hunt. You stopped hoping, And yet you remained. Not because of strength, not because of tools, but because something inside you refused. Refused to bow to the cold, refused to accept extinction, refused to believe that this world, this cruel, shrinking world, was allowed to erase you without a fight. You adapted. You left behind the old trails, the old beliefs, the old comfort of thinking tomorrow would look like today. You began to build things differently, think differently, eat things you once would have buried. You became something else. Not yet the people who would tame fire fully, or who would shape the land with bone and blade, but something in between, a silhouette moving through the blizzard, half starved and half divine. You walked on feet wrapped in reindeer hide, holding your tools like prayers, your fire like a child, and every step you took across that frozen earth was one the cold didn't expect you to make. This was not just winter, this was the world closing in, and still, you kept walking. Your breath turns to ice before it leaves your mouth. It settles on your face, gathers in your nostrils, stings your eyes. You learn to breathe differently, through the corner of your mouth, behind a strip of hide, just enough to keep your lungs from cracking in your chest. The cold no longer waits for night. It hunts at noon. It presses its fingers beneath your ribs, even while you walk. The wind has grown teeth, not sharp but endless, gnawing, pulling, tearing at you like a thing that believes you don't belong here. And maybe it's right, your skin is wrong for this world. Too thin, too open. Every inch of it exposed is an invitation for death. Fingers rot, lips split, eyelids freeze shut. You've seen people try to travel without fur, bold, foolish, or desperate. They don't come back whole. Sometimes they don't come back at all. So now you dress in the dead. You skin animals with reverence and urgency. The reindeer's hide is thick enough to stop wind. The mammoth's wool heavy enough to smother fire. You boil sinew into thread. You drill holes with sharpened antler. You stitch until your fingers bleed. Not for beauty, but for the chance to see one more sunrise. And what you wear becomes armour. Not metal, not leather, but warmth. Every layer is a choice. Every wrapping is a lesson. You line your boots with dried grass. Change it daily to keep your toes. You smear bear fat on your cheeks. Let it freeze into a mask that holds your skin together. Your hood is fur turned inward, breath trapped within, the only shelter the wind can't reach. You become unrecognisable, not the person you were when the forest still spoke, not the one who ran through green valleys and drank from clear rivers. Now you move like a creature the cold itself created, bent low, eyes narrow, wrapped in the silence of other animals. Children are born into this. They don't cry when snow touches them. They blink. They learn to walk in snowdrifts before they speak. Their first toys are bone needles. Their first lessons are how to patch a tear before the wind finds it. You carry them inside your coats. Their breath on your chest is the only fire that matters. There is no room for modesty anymore. Nakedness is death. And so your body becomes something practical, not something to decorate, not something to shame. Just skin that must be covered, muscles that must be warmed, a shell that must be maintained. The elders remember when it was different. When you could sleep beneath stars with nothing but a hide around your shoulders. When rivers ran free and the wind didn't cut so deep. But even they have stopped talking about those days. The past is not a place anymore. It's a ghost, a shape glimpsed through falling snow. Now there is only movement. Movement keeps the blood alive. You cannot sit too long. You cannot sleep too deep. You walk even when there is no game to follow. You walk because stillness is surrender. And the wind is always waiting. Sometimes it howls, sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it is so quiet you forget it's there, until your fingertips blacken or your lips stop moving. You've lost people that way. Just a few minutes too long outside the fire circle. Just one tear in the boot seam. Just one gust too strong. The cold doesn't kill like a predator. It kills like a god, without malice, without notice, but still you endure. You patch every hole. You share every scrap of hide. You sleep like piled stones, backs pressed together, trading warmth like a currency more valuable than meat. Even your tools change. You carve needles with more precision. You shape bone awls that won't snap in the cold. You learn to make boots with double soles, mittens with inner linings, masks that shield the nose and mouth. You become inventors, not of fire or metal, but of protection. Innovation is no longer for glory, it's for keeping fingers. To keep holding spears. One day the boy who almost froze last winter stands up before the group. He holds a pair of boots he made himself, stitched from seal hide, lined with wolverine fur, stuffed with dried moss. He survived because someone shared with him. Now he's learned to do the same. You nod, but say nothing. Words are too fragile for what this means. You are changing, not just in body, but in mind. You are not meant to survive this world. And yet, here you are, wrapped in reindeer, chewing fat, patching holes, moving forward, scarred, keen and watchful. The wind presses against you. You press back. And somewhere deep in the centre of you, behind the fur and fat and firelight, something refuses to be erased. A pulse, a name. The echo of what will one day be called human, and it is still warm. You learn to keep the cold out, but not the hunger. It waits in the belly like a second heart, beating slower, louder, with every passing day. You eat what you can, lichen scraped from rock, marrow sucked from broken bone, strips of dried sinew soaked in spit. But it isn't enough. It's never enough. The herds are gone. Once they filled the horizon. Mammoth, bison, reindeer, moving together in great rivers of life, hooves pounding, steam rising from their backs, the ground shaking under your feet. You learned the world by their rhythm. Where they drank, you drank. Where they gave birth, you gave thanks. You followed them across valleys and plains, year after year. You thought they would always be there, but they've moved on, farther south, farther west, into lands where the snow falls later and melts earlier, into places where the wind is still cruel, but not yet sovereign. You saw the last ones pass like a dream, thin, restless, their eyes scanning the horizon like they knew what was coming before you did. And then they were gone. No tracks, no droppings, no breath in the air, just silence. And that silence grows heavier. You walk through old trails now, empty and cold. The marks on the trees are faded, the trampled paths filled with snow. The sacred waterhole is a flat sheet of ice. You kneel beside it anyway, press your hand to its surface and listen. But there's nothing beneath, not even fish. You stop hunting with hope. Now you hunt with memory. You go where the animals once were. You wait in the places where they used to sleep. You lay traps in the old crossing paths, knowing they will stay empty, but setting them anyway, because the doing matters, because not doing means giving in. The hunters grow thinner. You see it in their eyes, not fear, just absence, the kind of stillness that comes when the body begins to forget itself, when the limbs move because they must, not because they believe. One hunter doesn't return, another breaks a leg in the ice and is left behind. You do not speak their names, you build no cairns. The hunger has no time for grief. You chew bones until your jaw aches. You boil leather straps. You dig into the stomachs of wolves and foxes, praying their last meals left something edible inside. You find half-digested moss and share it like treasure. Someone coughs up blood that night. No one says anything. And still, you move. You follow ghost trails, footprints days old, claw marks on frozen bark. Sometimes you find scat, still warm. You crouch beside it, steaming in the snow, and weep. Not because you're afraid, but because it means you're close, because the world hasn't taken everything yet. Then one day, you see them, far off, at the edge of the world, a cluster of reindeer, heads low, steam rising from their nostrils, grazing on something you cannot see, hidden beneath the ice-crusted earth. Your breath stops, your body forgets the cold. You fall to your belly, crawl forward through the snow. You return to camp with news. No one cheers, but they stand. They ready their spears, bind their feet, smear fat across their faces. They do not speak, not out of fear, but out of ritual. The hunt is sacred again, not just a necessity, but a return, a reclaiming, A promise that the land has not forgotten you. The chase is brutal. You move for hours, maybe days. The reindeer flee, but slowly. They are tired too, weak. The snow slows them, but it slows you more. Every step costs more than it gives. But you are used to cost. You are used to pain. You drive them toward the riverbank, where the ice is thin, where you've prepared the trap. It works. One breaks through. Its legs flail. It cries out, a sound that reaches something old in you, something human and not. You rush forward, spears plunge, blood hits snow, and it is enough. Not plenty, not safety, but enough. You return with meat, with fat, with bone, with hope. The children's eyes widen when they see it. The elders nod, the fire burns higher. That night your hands smell like blood and smoke. Your mouth tastes like marrow. Your stomach, for the first time in moons, feels full, but you know it won't last. The herds are moving on, always, and so must you. You are no longer people who stay, you are people who follow. You sleep with your boots on now. Your sleds are never fully unpacked. You keep the meat hung and ready. You watch the sky each night, guessing where the wind will drive the herds next. You have learned to live inside motion, to belong to the road more than the fire. The world will not wait for you. But if you move fast enough, if you move wisely, if you move together, you just might outlast it. And somewhere ahead, just past the edge of the known, the reindeer still run. And you are not finished yet. You carry the meat home in silence, not from reverence, not from exhaustion, but because silence is the only language the cold hasn't stolen from you. The snow muffles your footsteps, but it can't silence your memory. And memory weighs more than the sled. He was behind you once, you remember it. The curve of his back, the way he chewed the fur trim of his glove when thinking, the sound he made, half sigh, half hum, before every throw. He was the first to spot the herd, the first to speak, the one who said, "We move tonight." You didn't see him fall. No one did. Maybe it was a slip on the ice, maybe a broken leg, maybe a moment's breath that took too long in the open wind. One moment he was part of the group. The next, just absence, a missing shadow, a name no longer echoed down the line. You called for him, you went back, but the snow had covered his prints, as if the land itself had inhaled and swallowed him whole. You told the others when you returned. They didn't cry, they didn't speak. They just nodded and placed another log on the fire, as if warmth could fill the shape he left behind. He wasn't the first, he wouldn't be the last. Some die in the hunt, others die in the stillness between. One old woman simply closed her eyes and never opened them again. A boy went to collect water and vanished in the white. A baby was born blue and buried beneath mammoth bone. No ceremony, no chants, just silence and snow and the long exhale of those who remain. At night the fire circles are smaller. You don't notice it all at once. It's in the spacing of bodies, in the extra strip of hide no one claims, in the hollow way people sit closer together, but somehow farther apart. The warmth doesn't go as far as it used to. The stories stop before they begin. Grief has no words here. It isn't loud, it doesn't scream. It seeps in, quiet and patient, the same way frost claims fingers. But you carry them. In the way you tie your boots now, doubled, tighter like he taught you. In the way you throw your spear, angled slightly to the left, just as she did. In the way you listen to the ice, silent, cautious, waiting for it to breathe before you step. You carry them not because of ritual, but because forgetting them would mean admitting this cold is stronger than memory. And it isn't. You speak their names sometimes, not aloud, just in your chest, in the rhythm of your breathing, in the pause between wind gusts. You don't need a grave to remember someone. You only need to survive the thing they didn't. Some you buried, some you couldn't. You left marks, stones stacked in threes, antlers driven into snow, charcoal handprints on the cave wall, not so they'd be found, but so they wouldn't disappear. The ones who didn't come back, they taught you what staying costs. They taught you to tie the sleds tighter, to watch each other longer, to never cross the ice without a rope. They taught you how to say goodbye without saying it, how to keep walking when you want to kneel, how to build fire with trembling hands. Some say they are with the ancestors now, That they walk in a land without wind, where meat is never dry, where fire never dies. Maybe, but even if that's true, their bodies are here, in the snow, in the silence, in the spaces you step around, and you keep stepping, because stopping is joining them, because every step forward carries their weight, because if they were here, they would not let you fall. You still dream about them. Sometimes they're just out of reach, calling your name through the trees, waving from behind the mist. Other times, they walk beside you again, as if nothing happened, their faces calm, their breath warm. You wake from those dreams with frost in your eyes, but you do not cry. You get up, you check the fire, you check the meat. You hold your child close and place their small foot into the boot the missing man once patched, and you keep going. Because grief here is not about feeling, it's about doing. And doing is all you have left, so you walk. Each name a beat in your chest, each memory stitched into your coat, each silence heavier than the last. You do not run from it, you do not bury it, you wear it, because you were the one who came back, and that means something. It has to. The fire used to be everything. It was the centre, the source, the line between life and whatever waited outside the light. It gave you heat, it gave you story, it gave you time. Fire was the gift that separated you from the dark, from the beasts, from death itself. But now, it's not enough. Not here, not anymore. You build it the same way. Stones, moss, dung, wood soaked in fat. You breathe on the ember like it's your last living child. It catches, it dances. For a while, you even believe. But the cold is bigger now, hungrier. It doesn't care about flame. It presses through the walls, drips from the ceiling, slithers through the cracks you can't seal. You sit near the fire, and still your toes grow numb. Your breath turns to frost while you speak. You feed it everything you have. Kindling, bones, old tools, even strips of clothing. And still, it dies by morning. Not quickly, just quietly, just less. You make your shelters deeper now. Not just caves, but chambers inside caves. Hollowed dens beneath snowbanks, lined with skins and packed with clay. You share breath, you share bodies. You sleep in bundles, tangled limbs, and overlapping ribs. You wake to find ice on your lashes, frost in your ears, but at least you wake. And still you feel it, beneath the skin, the slow burn of fatigue, the ache in your joints, the tightness in your chest. When you draw in air, so cold it scrapes the inside of your ribs. You warm stones in the fire and hold them to your belly like talismans. You wrap children in layers until they look like bundles of meat, silent and sweating. You whisper to them not to fall asleep too early. You talk to the fire now, not in words, but in rhythm. In the way you feed it, in the way you sit before it, in the way you press your face close and breathe, as if your own lungs might give it more life. You ask it questions. With your eyes, are we safe yet? Have we done enough? Will you last until dawn? Sometimes it answers. Most nights, it doesn't. You learn the difference between light and heat. Fire glows even when it no longer warms. The illusion of comfort. A cruel magic. You reach out your hands and they stay cold. Your fingers cramp, your lips crack. But still you stare, because the glow is hope, even when the warmth is gone. You burn memories now. The old sled your father carved, the woven mat your sister made before she bled out on the ice, the figurine your child shaped from mammoth ivory. You hesitate, but only once. Then it goes into the flames, one by one, piece by piece. You don't watch them turn to ash, you just sit closer. Even the smoke has changed. It doesn't rise like it used to. It sinks, it clings, it fills the chamber until your eyes sting and your chest burns. But you stay inside anyway, because outside is worse. Because outside isn't wind anymore. It's teeth. You've seen what the cold does when the fire dies. You've held the body of someone who froze in their sleep. Eyes open, hands curled around their own ribs like they were trying to hold themselves together. You've watched lips turn blue, skin turn grey, the last breath rise like steam and vanish. There are no goodbyes in this cold, only silence, only fire that couldn't hold. So you start making more of them, small ones, personal ones. One for each tent, each chamber, each breath. You ration fuel with precision. Dung stacked, bark dried, nothing wasted. You assign watchers, not the strongest, but the most stubborn. Those who would rather lose sleep than lose flame. One night the wind breaches the seal of the main shelter. It doesn't howl, it exhales, like something testing its reach. The fire flinches. A moment later, it gutters. Sparks rise, fade. Everyone wakes at once. No one speaks. Every hand moves. You pile on fuel, you fan with hides, you scream into the coals with your breath. It returns. Barely, but it returns. And for the rest of the night, no one sleeps. You sit together, back to back, cheek to cheek, and watch the fire like it's the only god that ever listened. Your arms burn from holding each other. Your eyes sting. Your stomach aches. But you live. And that is what fire gives now. Not warmth, not safety, not comfort, just a margin, just a delay, just a few more hours to stay human. You used to think of fire as power. Now you understand. It's permission. Permission to continue. Permission to try again. Permission to be more than meat in the snow. And that's all you ask. Not triumph, not peace. Just one more night where your breath still clouds the air. Just one more morning where your fingers still move. Just one more day where you don't become the thing someone else has to burn. The fire still burns, but the laughter is gone. It didn't leave all at once. It faded like breath in the wind, a little quieter each night, a little slower to return. The children still moved, still played, still mimicked the elders, and chased one another around the fire pit, but the joy had been pulled thin, like sinew stretched over too many meals. Now they sit in silence, eyes wide, hands folded, their small faces half wrapped in fur, too young to understand the cold in their bones isn't just temperature, it's inheritance. The first gift passed down in this world is fear, not of monsters but of nothing, of no food, of no light, of no return. You used to measure time by their noise, the morning giggles, the shrieks when snow was thrown, the small defiant songs hummed through frozen lips. Now you measure time by their stillness, by how long they can sit without speaking, by the way they watch you, not like children watching a parent, but like animals watching a hunter, careful, quiet, waiting to see what you become. They are learning too quickly. You see it in the way they study fire, how their eyes don't widen with wonder anymore, but with calculation. How they crouch beside the hunters, mimicking spear movements with sticks. How they touch dried hides and sniff them, guessing which ones will burn better if the wood runs out. One of them is carving, not a toy, a hook, sharpened bone tied to sinew. His fingers are too small for this task, but he does it anyway, because he's seen the older ones fail, because he knows hunger doesn't care how old you are. He looks up at you when he's finished, not for praise, but for permission. You nod. That's all he needs. The games are gone. No more pretend mammoth hunts. No more hide and seek in the snowdrifts. No more finger drawings in the soot. Now they play survival. They take turns tending to a pretend fire, scolding each other when it dies. They trade invisible meat and pretend to barter for furs. They speak in whispers, imitating the way you speak now. Tight, low, controlled. The cave wall that once bore their red handprints has begun to fade. No one repaints it. No one dips their fingers in ochre anymore. What's the point of marking a wall when the wall might collapse, when you might not be here tomorrow? One child once reached for it in the dark, tracing a faded print that no longer matched her own hand. She looked at you. You looked away. They no longer cry for food. They know better. A crying child uses warmth, uses energy, uses attention. A crying child might be left behind if the sleds need to be lightened, so they cry on the inside. You see it in their eyes, glassy and full. In their lips, pressed too tightly. In their dreams, they still dream. But now they dream in silence. You wake to small hands clenching your arm, to a child pressed against your chest, breathing fast. No words, just eyes, just fear. You hold them close and whisper stories of warmth, of light, of a world before the cold. You say them not because they are true, but because you must believe they might be again. The youngest stopped speaking 2 moons ago. No injury, no sickness, just stopped. She walks, she eats, she listens, but no sound leaves her. You tried to make her laugh. Faces, stories, even the mammoth tooth trick she loved before. Nothing. Just eyes. Just silence. You hold her tighter now, as if your arms could remind her who she was. They are changing. Not just growing, hardening. Their hands are already calloused. Their shoulders already bracing against wind. They no longer flinch at the sight of blood. They help dress carcasses. They carry bones. One dragged a fox back to camp last week, blood smeared across his face like war paint. He smiled briefly, but no one smiled back. You wonder what will remain of them, if this winter lasts another year, or 2, or longer, if they grow up never knowing what it means to play, to shout, to dance beneath stars that aren't cold. Will they become stronger than you? Or will they become less? You think of your own childhood, of green, of rivers, of summer rain, of laughing so hard your chest hurt. You can't give that to them. All you can give is meat, fur, fire, and the weight of your silence. One night a boy who hasn't spoken in days picks up a coal and draws on the cave wall. Not a handprint, not an animal, but a line, sharp, jagged, endless, a horizon of teeth. You do not stop him. He draws more, a mammoth, a child, a fire, all of it with shaking hands. The others gather, eyes wide. They do not speak, but their breath grows louder, warmer. Something old stirs, not laughter, but something near it, a sound, a spark, and for a moment the silence thins. You let them draw, because fire wasn't enough. But maybe memory still is. The cave wall held the mammoth in charcoal, but the one outside the cave was already gone. Bones scattered, blood drained, fat rendered and gone. The stomach was used for water. The hide was stretched, half raw, over the sleeping hollow. What remained now was hunger, and the things that used to be unthinkable. You never wanted to eat fox. Too wiry, too bitter, too clever. They weren't prey, they were watchers. Silent red streaks across the snow, eyes glowing behind trees. You respected them. You followed their prints when tracking rabbit. You even mimicked their calls to throw off wolves. They were teachers in a way, old, wild, untouchable. But then one died in your trap. Thin, mangy, snarling even in death. You didn't waste it. You skinned it with a knife of chipped bone and burned the fur to purge the smell. The meat was tough. The children gagged. One of the elders refused to touch it. But you swallowed, chewed, swallowed again, and waited. It stayed down. It warmed your gut. You learned to eat what watched you, even wolves. It began with the carcass of one found frozen in the ravine, half buried beneath snow. Its ribs were clean, flesh eaten from within by its pack. Still, there was meat on the hind legs. You cut carefully. You boiled it for hours. The broth was black, oily, wrong, but it gave strength, and wrong was a luxury now. Fear had to be redefined. You feared bears, not just for their size or strength, but because they were gods once, walkers between worlds, dreamers of the cave. They were symbols, stories. You carved their faces in bone, wore their claws around your neck. You whispered to them in the trees. But that winter, a bear stumbled into camp, weak, bleeding, eyes milky with starvation. You watched it die at the edge of the light, too tired to retreat, too proud to fall. You waited until morning, then cut into it. The children cried while you flensed the body, not from sadness, from confusion. They had been told the bear watched over them, that to kill one meant you owed something in return. But you had nothing left to give, no offerings, no songs, only frostbitten fingers and shaking hands and the sound of ribs snapping apart beneath your blade. You buried the skull, not in honour, in fear, because you were still human enough to feel it. But you ate, and the fat clung to your bones, and no one died that week. Later, when food grew even scarcer, you started boiling hides. The ones too stiff to sew. The ones marked with age and ash. You scraped them clean and turned them into a stew, so thick you had to chew it. And when even that ran low, you turned to bone. Marrow became gold. You crushed femurs with stones, split ribs open with axes, sucked the life from ancient beasts long gone. The marrow was sour, sometimes dry, but when it was wet and warm, it was a miracle. It slid down your throat like memory, like something your body remembered from better days. And then came the day you found one of your own traps snapped bloodied, with no animal in sight. Only a human print, small, fresh. Someone had taken the meat, you knew who, or at least you could guess. They were part of the other camp, the ones who had moved west a moon ago. You thought they were gone, dead, swallowed by the ice, but here was proof. They had survived, barely, and they were hunting your traps now. The question came later. Would you eat what they left behind? Would you eat what they had touched? Or worse, would you take from them? It was no longer about wolves or foxes or the sacred things. It was about the shift, the slow unravelling of what made you feel like more than an animal. You were still human, but that word was thinning, like breath in winter air. One night someone brought back a bird, dead, frozen, headless. No one asked where it came from. No one cared. You boiled it, feathers and all. Later, in the dark, you wondered aloud, what would happen if there were no more birds, no more wolves, no more sacred? Would you eat what you are? The silence was long. Then someone said, not unless we had to. You didn't ask again, but you all knew. The line was there, unspoken, but present, thin, fragile. You would not cross it today, maybe not tomorrow. But hunger was no longer a shadow. It was a guide. And it walked closer every night. You chewed on tendon as you thought of it, gnawed until your jaw ached, swallowed, breathed. You watched the others do the same. None of you looked up, none of you spoke, and in that silence you knew. Fear had once kept you alive, but now it would only slow you down. You would eat what you feared, because you feared death more, and because something deep in you refused to die quietly. The snow would not stop. It fell sideways now, not down, blown by winds too strong to face, too cruel to name. The sky had been grey for days, maybe weeks. You stopped counting. Counting was a thing for warmth, for stories, for calendars carved into antler. Now you measured only one thing, how deep you could go, because there was nothing left above, no herds, no movement, no light. The world had turned flat and white and dead. You saw no tracks but your own, and even those vanished within hours, swallowed by the storm, like it was chewing time itself. So you went down, you dug. At first it was shallow, a scraping under the snowdrift, a hollow carved beside the base of a rock, somewhere to get out of the wind, somewhere to sleep for an hour without fear of freezing in your own breath. But it didn't hold. The cold seeped through, then deeper. You began to cut into the earth itself, through permafrost, through ice-laced mud, through layers of ancient dirt so hard your hands bled just trying to loosen it. You used antler picks, mammoth tusk fragments, fire-hardened stakes, and when those broke, you used your fingers. You worked in silence. One dug while the others held hides over the entrance to keep the snow from blowing back in. You rotated like ants, one at a time, one breath at a time, 1 inch deeper each hour, and when you struck stone, you dug around it. This was no longer shelter. It was burial in reverse. You did not hide from death anymore. You tunneled through it, and beneath the frost, there was still dirt. Cold, yes, but softer, older. It smelled like rot, like memory. It crumbled in your hands. You dug until the roof was low, until you could not sit up straight, until you could barely breathe. But it was warm, warmer than the wind above. You lit a fire there, a small one, smokeless, just enough to keep your fingertips from cracking. You lined the walls with skins, hung fat on carved pegs, pressed bodies together for sleep. The earth became your womb, your grave, your final fortress. The snow above sealed you in. But you did not fight it. You let the weight settle, let the drifts smooth over the entrance. You left only a narrow shaft for smoke, hidden under a pile of rocks to keep it from giving you away. You buried yourself and you waited. You learned to listen to the dirt, to how it shifted, creaked, spoke. You could hear when something passed above. A fox, a wind, a groan of ice shifting under its own weight. You began to map the world not in sight but in sound, in feeling, in pressure. A child said it first. It's warmer underground. They were right. Not just warmer in skin but in thought. The wind didn't claw at your ears here. The dark wasn't as deep. There was something old in the earth. Something slow, not kind but indifferent. And sometimes indifference is safer than wrath. You dug more chambers, storage for meat, sleep hollows for the children, a narrow tunnel to piss in. You reinforced the walls with bones. The ceiling with packed snow and hides stretched tight like drums. You carved seats into the wall, built shelves, laid furs with careful layering. It became a home, not just a hole. And in that hole, you remembered what it meant to belong. You told stories again, whispered at first out of fear the cold would hear. But the fire was steady. The food lasted. The walls held. And your voice grew louder. You spoke of the sky you no longer saw, the stars, the herd migrations, the thunder of mammoth feet. Not because they were coming back soon, but because you had seen them once. And that mattered. Sometimes someone would crawl to the surface to check the world. They'd come back white-faced, shaking, covered in ice. Not yet. The blizzard still lived. But underground there was time. Time to heal cracked hands. Time to bind wounds. Time to sleep for more than an hour. To think. You taught the children to feel for cracks in the walls. To tie knots by torchlight. To tell direction by wind shift in the smoke shaft. You gave them skills, not hope. Hope was dangerous. But knowledge, that could be buried and still live. Then one night, while carving new shelves, someone struck something strange. Not stone, not ice, bone. You scraped gently. A skull. Human. Jaw still intact. Teeth worn but present. Half crushed by the weight of earth, but still staring. You paused. Not from fear, but from recognition. You were not the first to dig here. Someone else had buried themselves. Long before your camp came. Maybe during another winter. Another great silence. Maybe they died inside. Maybe they were waiting too. Maybe they had survived longer than they should have. You sat with the skull in your lap, and for the first time in many nights, you wept. Not for them, but for yourself, because their presence meant this had happened before, because their presence meant you might not make it out, because you might become just another skull in the dirt. You buried it again, carefully, with food beside it, with fire-smooth stone, with a hand pressed to its brow. You said no words, but your silence meant, I see you. And then you kept digging, because the snow above didn't care who remembered whom, because the wind was still waiting, because you had nowhere else to go. The cold had stripped everything else away. So you made a world underground, and in the belly of the earth you learned, survival isn't always rising. Sometimes it's burrowing deep enough not to be seen. You could have stayed underground forever, or maybe it just felt that way. The rhythm became your religion. Wake, check the fire, scrape the ceiling to keep the air flowing, stir the bone broth, wrap the children tighter, sleep if the wind above was loud. You stopped counting days. The snow no longer fell, it pressed. The world above had turned to stone, and you were its pulse, beating beneath it, faint and stubborn. But something changed. First it was the sound, not silence, movement. Drips from the shaft above. Melting? No, not quite, but softer, slower. The edges of the cold had dulled. The wind, when it passed, no longer screamed. It murmured, it breathed. Then came the smell, faint, foreign, not rot, not smoke, something wild. Fur, dung, animal, the scent of life. The herds were moving again. No one said the word aloud, no one dared, but you felt it rise inside your chest like a hunger more dangerous than starvation. Hope. You surfaced that night, slowly, carefully, as if the sky might crack open and punish you for your faith. But it didn't. The snow was still high, still cruel, but the stars were there, blinking, clear. The air hurt less when you breathed it, and in the distance you saw them, dots moving, woolly backs, bowed against the wind, shadows with breath. The mammoths had returned, not all of them, but enough. Enough to follow, enough to try. You descended again and told the others. They listened in silence, same as always. But their eyes changed. Someone stood up. Another began to gather rope. One woman who hadn't spoken since her daughter died reached for her spear and grunted once. You nodded. That was all it took. This was it. The last migration. Not because you believed it would lead to paradise, not because the snow was gone, but because staying meant slow death. You had eaten the roots beneath your camp. The bone broth was thin. The children's ribs showed when they breathed. And something in the land had shifted. It wasn't mercy. It wasn't invitation. It was a crack in the ice. And cracks are how you survive. You packed fast, only what you could carry. Firestones. The last hide blankets, your sharpest bones. You left behind carvings, scraped symbols into the shelter wall with charcoal, spirals, tracks, hands. You placed them low, near the ground, where no snow would reach. A message, not for the future, but for the past. We were here. We endured. You walked before dawn. The sun wasn't warm, but it rose, pale gold over blue. The herds moved slowly, carving paths through the snow with sheer weight. You followed their trail, dung frozen like stone, prints deep as your knees. They were going somewhere, south maybe, or just away. That was enough, but following them wasn't easy. The snow was wet now, deceiving. It melted on the surface, but underneath it stayed sharp. Your feet sank, your sled dragged. Children had to be lifted one by one, swaddled and passed hand to hand like fire. One old man collapsed after the second ridge. He begged to be left. You refused. You tied him to the sled with hide rope and pulled until your legs bled. You moved like ghosts, quiet, thin, half real. Every night you built small fires, barely enough to keep meat from freezing solid. The wind returned, but softer, as if watching you now instead of chasing. You sang again, only once, a lullaby, cracked and quiet, for the baby with frostbitten toes. No one stopped you. The children began to speak again. Not much, not loud, but enough. One pointed to the mammoths and whispered a name. Another asked if the trees would come back when the ice left. No one had an answer, but they kept walking. Sometimes you saw other camps in the distance. Thin lines of movement, lights like stars bobbing through the snow. Others had survived. Others were migrating. Sometimes you passed close enough to see their faces, pale, hollow, familiar. But no words were exchanged, no calls, just nods, just breath, just movement. The cold was still here, but it was no longer everywhere. The rivers cracked in the afternoon sun. The wind blew dirt with the snow. Birds, 2 of them, passed overhead in silence. The youngest child in your group cried when she saw them. No one told her to stop. By the 7th day, the trees returned. Dead ones at first. Black spikes in the white. Then stumps, then roots, then brush, brittle, tangled, still clinging to snow but alive. And then you smelled it. Mud, actual mud. Earth, wet and rich and old. The kind of earth that gives, the kind that remembers. You fell to your knees and pressed your fingers into it. It was cold, but it did not bite. You had made it. Not to the end, but to the next part. The part where surviving meant more than eating, where warmth didn't just come from fire, where stories might be told in full again, where children could draw more than bones. The herds moved on, still distant, but now they led you towards something instead of away from nothing. You walked slower now, not because of weakness, but because you could, because the world was no longer closing, it was opening, cracking apart like ice underfoot, letting you in. Some of them had never known it. The younger ones, the ones who'd grown inside the storm, who took cold as the default, whose dreams never included rivers that ran or grass that whispered in the wind. To them, warmth was not something lost, it was something imagined, a word muttered by old people in half-sleep, a thing spoken of in cave-dark voices, always just beyond the firelight. But others, some of you, remembered. You remembered what it meant to wake up and not shiver, to walk outside without a weapon clutched in hand. to hear the buzz of flies in summer, the snap of insects in bark, the slow, lazy ripple of water over rock. You remembered green, and it burned more than the cold ever did, because now the snow thinned. Not gone, but thinner, patchy, melting in slashes across stone. And as it vanished, it revealed not life, but what the cold had hidden. Bones, thousands of them, scattered like wind-blown teeth, split femurs, broken ribs, skulls with holes, human and animal together. The remains of those who had tried what you tried, walked where you walked. Not all of them made it. Some were curled together, frozen in their final embrace. Others looked like they'd died reaching for something. An exit, a breath, a promise. You buried what you could, not because you were told to, because memory told you they deserved it. Even if they had no names, even if they were only bones, you pressed them into the ground with fire-warmed hands, placed stones over their eyes, whispered nothing. The ground was soft enough now. It received them. And then you walked on. The further you moved from the deep snow, the more the landscape cracked open like a wound. Trees returned. Not whole, not alive, but standing. You found a stream under the ice, and the water there tasted like stone and sky. Cold, but not killing. And then came the heat. Not much. A sun that stayed longer. A wind that did not sting. The feeling of your skin warming from the outside, not just from fire. The ache of thaw in your joints. The tingling pain in your fingers as blood returned to places you'd forgotten had gone numb. For a while, no one spoke of it. It felt like a trick. Like something that could be taken away the moment you looked directly at it. But warmth does not hide. It reveals. And as it spread, so did memory. The old woman began humming again. A tune no one knew, but one that made the children sit up. A lullaby from before the freeze. Her voice was cracked, almost brittle, but inside it was the sun. She sang every night after that, softly, like a secret given back. One man began carving again, not traps, not tools, a face, smoothed from ivory, chiselled with care. He said it was his brother, lost in the second storm. No one questioned him. The children passed it around, touching the eyes. They said it looked like someone who knew what warm rain felt like. A girl drew her first animal. Not a mammoth, not a wolf, a bird, wings spread, beak open. A thing that could leave the ground and not fall. Her fingers were clumsy, but the lines were true. And when she was done, she didn't show it to anyone. She just held it close and whispered something to it before hiding it in her wrap. They remembered. And with memory came hunger, not for meat but for story. They asked again about what it used to be like, how the river moved, how trees bent in storms, what thunder sounded like in spring. You didn't tell them stories to comfort, you told them to preserve. Because survival without memory is just waiting to die, but survival with memory, that's living. That's fire carried forward. You reached a place of stones, flat and sun-soaked. The snow barely touched it. A ridge opened below, a valley with brush, with game trails, with earth that didn't crack when stepped on. You knew you couldn't settle forever, not yet. The climate still turned like a slow knife, but you could stay for now, and you did. You built fire rings, dug new pits, gathered bark not for burning but for weaving. The children played again, not pretend hunts but real games, running, throwing stones, laughing. One child shrieked at a frog and then chased it, falling face first into mud. She didn't cry. She laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. You laughed too, and something inside you gave way, because this, finally, was what you had carried through the storm. Not the fire, not the tools, not the bones. This noise, this reminder that the ice could never quite take everything, that somewhere, hidden in the last folds of your memory, was the shape of what came before. And it had survived, in your hands, in your voice, in their laughter. The warmth was not just outside now. It was yours again, and it had a name. The thaw didn't save us. It never could. The snow receded, yes. The winds softened. The light came back in flickers, then in hours. You saw green push through the brown. You saw animals return, and the river swell with melt. But none of it brought you back to who you were before. because that person is gone. We survived. That much is true. But survival is not salvation. It is a trade, and we paid for every breath. With memory, with pain, with pieces of ourselves we will never reclaim. Some still speak of the ice like it's a thing that happened to us. But we know better. It lives in us now, in the way we glance at clouds, in the way we hoard firewood even when the sun is warm, in the way we never fully trust silence. It shaped us, not just our bodies, our tools, our shelters, but our minds. We became watchers, planners, listeners. We learned to move when the animals move, to read sky as story, to take no warmth for granted and no kindness as free. We buried gods in the snow and made new ones out of bone and ash. We remembered the ones who did not return. We carried them in our hands, in our silence, in our scars. The thaw let us breathe again, but it did not erase the weight in our chest. Some of us will never speak of it. The worst days, the decisions we made, the meat we ate when no animal was near, the eyes we closed forever. Not out of shame, but because survival doesn't require confession, only endurance. And now, as we look to the horizon, where the mountains bleed light again, and birds trace their invisible songs through the sky, we carry more than hunger. We carry story. We carry fire, not just in our hands, but behind our eyes. The kind of fire that can't be stolen by snow. The kind that lives in words, in drawings, in the beat of feet across thawed soil. The thaw didn't save us. We saved ourselves. By remembering, by refusing to disappear, by becoming something the cold could not kill. And in the end, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything.